Hi, kitty cats. I am Amethyst Herrick, your hostess for Gender Identity Weekly, a weekly discussion about identity and gender from the contributors and guests of the Purple Paw Publications website, genderidentitytoday.com. This content right here is brought to you by subscribers of genderidentitytoday.com. If you're already a subscriber, first of all, thank you so much for your ongoing support. You know pretty dang well that subscribers not only receive new content directly to their email inboxes as soon as it publishes, but are also able to interact with every contributor directly, and that includes me. And if you don't want to interact with me, I have no clue what could be wrong with you. So, if you would like to support shows just like this one, as well as the other podcasts, videos, and written articles by our contributors, I hope you will consider subscribing using the links you're going to find in the show notes. All right, well, today I'm very, very enthusiastic to welcome Deane Benninghoven to the show. Hello, Deane.
Hi, Amy.
Deane is a certified hypnotherapist and a hypnosis instructor, and also the founder of Summit Hypnosis. I pulled this line from your website, which says your mission is to help everyday people overcome everyday problems. And I think I mentioned to you, I have this, like when I was a kid, it was back in the 70s or 80s, I think I found out about hypnosis and I was super fascinated by it. And as we were just mentioning a little bit earlier, the LGBTQ community has the tendency to suffer trauma and have difficulty defining who we are within our social environment. So that was why I wanted to talk to you. So let me start off. I always love starting off with like an origin story kind of thing. I've read your story, but can you tell us all, how did you end up discovering this healing power that hypnosis imbued upon you?
All right. Well, let's see. It's over 20 years ago now. I was, believe it or not, at that moment in a Rolex certified Swiss watchmaking school. Was getting close to the end of the school, and somebody ran through a red light and T-boned my truck, and I fractured a bone, a vertebra in my neck. I have a condition where when I break a bone, it tends to overgrow, and so there's just a little tiny nodule inside the spinal column. And at certain times, I would get stressed or I would move a certain way, and I would go numb in my body. I'd fall on the floor sometimes. I was in terrible pain all the time. And, over 20 years ago, the plan was just back a truck full of opioids up to the door and help yourself, right? But that's not a model for that's sustainable for life. And so as I decided to move away from that model after a few years of doing that, I was just left with this chronic, horrible pain. I describe it like a pain, like a high-pitched sound at the base of my skull all the time. And I didn't really know how I was going to go on like this. I couldn't work because I never knew when this was going to happen. I was in pain all the time. I was distracted, and I was looking for answers. And I happened to find an article about them doing neck surgeries on people in Belgium using only hypnosis and no other kind of anesthetic. And I thought, wow, if they can do that, then maybe there's something I can do for my neck. And so I called the hypnotists in my area, and what I found was I couldn't afford it. I hadn't. And what I really, really wanted, Amy, was for somebody to teach me how to do self-hypnosis, because the truth is all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. It's a state, a natural state. And I'll pause here and just explain what I mean. Each and every one of us go through hypnotic states multiple times a day. If you've ever been in a deep daydream, and it feels like, boom, now I'm back in my body, that is a hypnotic state. That's a state where your conscious and your subconscious mind needed to communicate, and they can't do that when you're in your full wakeful state. When you're driving the car and you get where you're going and you realize, I'm here already. I hope I stopped for all the red lights. That's called highway hypnosis. That's a profound hypnotic state. And what's happening there is the body knows what to do. You don't really have to think about how you drive. So the body's doing its thing. The mind is just focused enough on what's happening right in front of you that sets up an ideal situation to drop into hypnotic states. And when I do hypnosis with people in the office, I have them relax their body, give their body something that it knows how to do. And then my voice is what you're focusing your mind on. And there's a kind of a process to that. But falling asleep at night, you pass through the hypnagogic state. And when you wake up in the morning, every single day, every time you fall asleep and wake up, you're in the hypnopompic state. So all of this is just to say it's a natural part of who you are. And what I see my role as a hypnotist is to teach you how to use that, because that was the thing that I couldn't get when I really needed it. I wanted somebody to just teach me how do you do this part. And it was finding that at the time, at least, uh, people wanted me to buy a package of several sessions, which was a couple of $1,000. I didn't have that. Or somebody said, well, if you pay me $7,000 up front, I'll work with you until your pain is manageable.
Right.
I can't do that. So long story short, I went to the library. I got both books they had about hypnosis. And I started reading and trying to figure this out for myself. It took me, once I understood the basics by myself, it took me about 4 months to get to a place where I could stop the pain, turn the pain down, and then
Wow.
start doing things like yoga, some stretches, and some kind of movement exercises that really helped. But it wasn't resolved. It wasn't really, and I still am a person who has chronic pain. Every morning, the first thing I do is I use hypnosis to kind of put a patch in this painful area, and I just leave it there for the rest of the day. That's the process. It
Wow.
takes practice to be able to do that, but been doing this for 20 years now. But it doesn't take 20 years to be able to do that. Um, but there was a whole lot of emotional stuff that flowed into how I experienced physical pain. And it's for all of us. Whenever you have chronic physical pain, there's a host of attendant emotions like anger and grief and frustration and on and on and on. Anger, if I didn't
Yeah.
say that. So um, to be able to deal with those emotions, and for me, those emotions went all the way back to childhood. And for
Right.
all of us, really, they do. Um, the thing about hypnosis is that when we talk about hypnosis, we're always talking about working with the subconscious mind, subconscious beyond the realm of what you think about every day. Heart rate, your autonomic nervous system, that's your heart rate, your breathing, blood flow, digestion, all of those things are part of your subconscious mind. Emotional responses, anxiety, worry, fear, rumination, um, phobias, all these things are part habits, the way you see yourself, the way you see the world around you. All of this is part of your subconscious mind. In fact, your conscious mind is really only about 5 to 10% of where the electricity that runs your brain goes.
Really?
Yeah,
5 to 10%?
5 to
That's a
10%.
bit of a bummer.
This is based on what brain science tells us today.
Yeah.
Now, a way to think about this is that if the conscious mind is over here in hypnosis, the conscious mind is really almost just like the lens that helps your subconscious mind figure out which of my existing patterns are appropriate for this situation. And then it's just going to plug them in, and it all happens without you. Um, but a way to think about this that makes sense is that kind of in between the conscious and the subconscious mind, there's another part of the mind called the critical factor or the critical faculty of mind. This part of the mind is like a guard, and it's actually there to protect all of the patterns, the ways we do things, and keep them just the way they are today.
Okay.
So this critical part of the mind is a comparing part of mind. It's constantly comparing what's happening now to what I know, what I believe, what I think, how I've responded before. And it's there to keep you from changing your mind. If tomorrow you just decided, I'm not going to look both ways before I cross the street, for some period of time, you're still going to involuntarily look both ways.
Sure.
That's what this guard is there for. So you can't just decide, I'm not going to look both ways before I cross the street. It's there to protect you. That's the main purpose of the way all of this works. So this guardian part of the mind, the critical part, is there to keep other people from changing your mind, not allowing information that could affect these patterns to get into the part of the mind where the patterns actually are. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
And it's also there to keep you yourself from just deciding to change your mind, because if you up and decide to do things differently, well, that could be dangerous. And so your subconscious mind treats all of that stuff the same way. Don't really
That's
want
crazy.
those patterns.
Yeah.
Whenever we're in hypnotic states, the whole thing about it is that guardian part goes offline. That's the mechanism that makes hypnosis work. So with the guardian offline, now you're able to do two things with some guidance. One, you can import information that you've known consciously for a long, long time that's never gotten into your subconscious self.
I see.
Most of the time, I'm working with people as part of a team. So I'm working with their therapist, with their psychiatrist, or their mental health provider. They send them to me. These people have always been struggling for a long time, and they haven't quite gotten to where they could be with their mental health journey. Where hypnosis comes in is, with all the things you've learned that haven't gotten into your subconscious mind where they could affect change, we put you into a trance state, the guardian goes offline, and now you can download that information that you've been carrying around in your conscious mind into your subconscious mind. But also, we can start to, together, design some new patterns that make sense for the reality of your life today. Interestingly, from the moment we're born to somewhere between 7 to 10 years old, we don't yet have this critical guardian part of the mind.
Okay.
So everything that happens just happens, and it creates patterns. All of our patterns come from lived experiences. And those lived experiences, by the time we're around 7 to 10 years old, are pretty much locked in. How we see ourselves, how we see the world around us, the things that we're afraid of. We can certainly have experiences later in life, traumatic experiences, times when, if you've had a little fender bender or something, it seems like the whole world slows down. Well, what's actually happening is, in those moments, the subconscious mind opens like a pupil opens in a dark room, and it takes in everything about that traumatic experience. So there are the things that you're aware of in your environment. If in a car, for example, you might be aware of the song that's playing, or the intersection that you're at, or the feeling of the steering wheel. Those things could all become triggers in the future. But there are myriad things in the environment that you're not aware of. And those are the things that are subconscious triggers, and they affect you just as powerfully, as the triggers you're aware of. But that's, when that anxiety seems to just come out of nowhere. Well, there's something in the environment, or sometimes within your own biome that is there that your body can be aware of, that is a trigger.
I want to make sure that I understand this one bit too.
Sure.
Because you've mentioned this guardian, and I'm thinking of the way you would put it is that, and stop me if I'm already going off piste here, but you start bringing in knowledge and you've cataloged it, let's say, but it's consciously, and it's not until you can get that conscious information that could rebuild patterns down to the subconscious that you can affect healing, especially of trauma. Is that correct?
I would say that is exactly right.
Okay.
Now,
is it two directional? I'm curious, because are there things in your subconscious that could come out to I don't necessarily mean change what you have in your conscious mind, but I mean, is it bidirectional? Could you have?
Well,
Does that question make any sense?
it does make
Sorry.
sense, but I would say bidirectional isn't exactly the word I would use, because the subconscious mind is almost like it's hermetically sealed most of the
Okay.
time. How you know
Okay.
you've affected change there is because things in your what I would call the waking life are different. For
Okay.
example, uh, I've had many clients, for whatever reason, going into the grocery store can trigger tremendous anxiety. So we might work on what that feeling is. You know,
Yeah.
our subconscious mind is also the emotional center of our mind.
Yeah.
The subconscious mind doesn't speak with words; it speaks its own language, a language of allegory, metaphor. Our feelings are a metaphor for what's going on,
I
right?
see.
And so the feeling that you have when you're sitting in the car, unable to walk into the grocery store, that feeling is an accurate compass to what's really going on here.
I
In
see.
hypnosis, without all of the overlay of our conscious mind gumming up the works, we're actually working behind that guardian, right? The guardian is offline. So now you're also more suggestible when you're in hypnotic states than at any other time. So we're able to suggest, Amy, let's resolve this feeling that you have about going into the grocery store. Where's that feeling in your body? How can we work with that feeling? What is it trying to tell us, really? What are you really afraid of?
Yeah.
Um, in that moment, um, the subconscious mind is much more likely to reveal what's really going on. We use metaphors and things to do all of that, but
I see.
to understand it means you can change it, right? I don't know how people change it. That's really not my job to change things for you. I say all the time, we could do 1,000 sessions. I could say 1 billion words and never find just the right words to unlock this thing for you.
Sure.
But somewhere in your heart of hearts, when you're all by yourself, you've wished things would have been different. You've wished that somebody had said something or done something, or not said something or not done something.
Right.
That's the answer. That's what you need. And the beautiful part is, all of us, as we've grown up, have become the person that we needed then.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to recognize that we can be here for ourselves. We are our own strong defender. We're our own
Yeah.
advocate, right? And it's in hypnosis very powerful to introduce you to that part of yourself that is also that, if that makes sense. And so how do you know
Yeah.
you've affected that change is the next time you go to the grocery store, you might be using, a hypnotic anchor. I use hypnotic anchors a lot. That's something physical that you do that brings your mind and body back into the experiences we had during our session, like rubbing your fingers together, for example. So you might be rubbing your fingers together as you walk into the grocery store, but you're walking into the grocery store and you're not paralyzed. You're not
Yeah.
headed. So that's kind of an example of how you know that you've affected change subconsciously, is you brush up against these experiences that used to be problematic and suddenly they're not problematic, or not
Right.
problematic in the way they were or to the degree they were before.
Right.
Does that make sense?
When it does very much. I've got a one of the when I was reading, when I was a kid about hypnosis, because I was very interested in self hypnosis in
Mm-hmm.
particular. Not really for any good reason, just because I was a kid and it was like, ooh, that sounds cool, right?
Right.
But I would read stuff about the post hypnotic suggestion, which is, it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like, you're rubbing your fingers together so that you can get into the supermarket kind of thing. But what you've described in particular the highway hypnosis, you
Hmm.
called it, right?
Right.
I have also heard that described as a dissociative state.
Oh, very good question. Well, you didn't
So,
ask the
yeah,
question, but I see
no,
where
it
you're
was
going with this. So,
right. So, is this because I mean, we also see, because here, this was really ultimately where the question was going to go, so that you got the whole thing. That's a mental disorder, they
mm,
call it.
mm,
I just said dissociative state, but they're calling it a dissociative disorder. And yet it could be very helpful for us. So
that's
there's the
that
question.
that is a fantastic question.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
so, yes, hypnosis can be a dissociative state, but
Interesting.
it
Okay.
is a dissociative state that you control. So, when we have trauma, particularly severe
Okay.
trauma, our brain will become disassociative. It'll slip away because this is too much. And
Yes.
I had a tremendous amount of trauma, physical, mental, sexual, in my own life, and I know firsthand those dissociative states. But that's happening spontaneously, and I've had clients over the years who um, they became so accustomed to popping into that dissociative state, accustomed subconsciously that,
Yeah.
sitting in traffic, I'm stressed, I'm out, right? And
Yeah.
that's you're non-functional at that point in a lot of ways, or can be. But hypnosis, that dissociative state is a gigantic spectrum. Hypnosis is a
Okay.
gigantic spectrum, everywhere
Okay.
from those very light states that you enter naturally as you're falling asleep at night, or when you wake up in the morning, or in the shower. Shower thoughts. That's another state where your body
Yeah.
knows what it's doing and your mind is able to focus on other things. Um, those are very light states, and there's absolutely no danger of anything happening to you in those states. But if you fall into a deep dissociative state because something is triggering a trauma response in you, that can be dangerous.
Oh, sure.
But the hypnotic states are measured and they're within your control. How do we keep it within your control? Well, because as we're establishing what this pattern is, we're building in all of these safeguards. Does that
Okay.
does that make sense? So, for example, you'll never go into a state of hypnosis that's so deep that you even need to close your eyes when you're driving the car. That wouldn't be safe, right?
No.
Um, or to recognize, if you are a person who tends to fall into those very deep dissociative states quickly, that to stop and to notice, to look around, that you actually are safe. So it kind of can work both ways, to stop you from going into too deep of a disassociative state, but also to go into this state. Whenever we go into hypnotic states, one of the things that's interesting is we tend to become more calm. The emotional part of our mind tends to get quiet. And we've all
Oh,
had
yeah.
this experience of being really angry or upset. And you get in the car and you go for a drive. And after just a few minutes, you can still be thinking about the thing that was annoying or upsetting, but the emotional part gets quiet. So that's the benefit of using something like a hypnotic anchor. And we do that with a post hypnotic suggestion that goes typically something like, Amy, when you leave here today, whenever you rub your fingers together, you're going to go into a very, very light hypnotic state, just deep enough that the emotional part gets quiet. Now, the other thing that I do, and I do this typically in my first session, is I ask people to come to that session with a good memory. When you're in hypnosis, we can access memories in a very vivid way. In my practice, we don't access negative, traumatic, bad memories because I don't find any therapeutic value in that. But we can access a good memory. Our memories are really like wet clay. Every time we access a memory, we get the fingerprints of who we are today on that memory, right?
Sure.
So to access a good memory in a very vivid way means your brain is going to release those feel good chemicals that were there in that
Okay.
moment. So it's these two things working in tandem that we put together in the first session. One, when you rub your fingers together, you go into a light hypnotic state where The emotional part is quiet. That's part one. Part two, and you can feel this good feeling from your good memory when you rub your fingers together. So those two things, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in essence, that's what we're doing. So, our brains are always going to gravitate towards things that make us feel better, right? That's how people get in trouble with drugs and alcohol and things like that. They're negative typically, but they do make you feel better. So what we do is we set up a system where, one, things like anxiety or negative responses, emotions get quiet. Two, there's something that makes me feel good. And I don't have to drink anything or smoke anything or inject anything to get that sensation. Because our brains like that kind of response, every time you rub your fingers together, that's the suggestion, that's the response. So really we're using the way the brain works through repetition and association, like Pavlov's dog, to rewire it towards having a response that puts you in control rather than a response where you feel out of control.
I understand. I've got two directions I want to go, and I'm going to do the one that'll sound much more cool to me, right? Because if it's not cool to me, it does make a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here was the question: you had said before that our subconscious uses a particular language. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it has its own language, I think is how you said. And it's metaphor and it's allegory. But you had also, before we started recording, we talked a little bit about Carl Jung. And Jung saw all those as symbols, right? That the language was symbols.
Right.
So the question I was going to go toward here was, when you're doing that, the link there, because I would think you rub your fingers together. Let's say I'm just doing this. It doesn't seem like that would be a symbol, like a linkable symbol. How do you link all these things together? Is that question sensical?
So what we really want is two things. We want something tactile, because something tactile breaks you out of the mental part, right? And we want something, it doesn't have to be rubbing your fingers together. It could be anything. I have a number of people and they say, I always play with this ring that I wear around my neck. Well, we don't want it to be that, because you were already doing that and there'll be no intention behind it.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's this suggestion. Amy, when you rub your fingers together, you're going to notice that the let's just say anxious part becomes quiet. Yeah. And you're feeling that good memory from your past. And to be honest, the good memory is really just a starting point in that session. We do like probably another 45 minutes worth of looking at that experience of going to the grocery store, feeling that good feeling, experiencing it, coming out and noticing, hey, nothing happened. I'm okay. And all the way along this, I call it the path of life, right? We walk along this path of life, which is also a metaphor, right? But as we walk along this path of life, there are mirrors that show us the version of ourselves that is successfully able to navigate these things.
Oh.
And there's wisdom to be gained from each of these stops along the way. That wisdom doesn't come from me. It wouldn't mean anything if it came from me. That wisdom comes from that part of you that really does know, I can do this and be okay. And that's really the power of it. So every stop along the way, rub your fingers together. That's a really good insight, Amy. Rub your fingers together on that. Fold that into everything else that we're doing. And so really what I love about hypnosis is that it's not me. That for me, because of my experience, because I couldn't find somebody to work with who I could afford, who would teach me just this piece of it at the beginning, teaching self-hypnosis and empowering people with what they already have is like that weird tool you find in the attic of the house, right? I have no idea what it is. I don't know how to use it, but I've got it, right? Well, once you learn how to use it, it opens up so many possibilities of your potential. I don't know. That's,
Yeah.
you know, opens up a lot of potential possibilities. I think that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Not just for emotional responses, but for how you learn, uh, working with physical pain, chronic pain. That's one of the areas where I have gotten some extra certification in because it's really important to me. Um,
Hmm.
but it's really crafting these suggestions in ways that make sense to the person who's sitting across from you. I don't use any scripts in hypnosis. If you've studied it at all, you know scripts are kind of a big thing in
Mm.
hypnosis, even in professional hypnosis. You know, if you're anxious, there's a pretty good sized sector of hypnotists who are just going to whip out a anxiety script. And it might have been written in 1953, right?
Oh
It
gosh.
has nothing to do with the person who's sitting in the chair with you. Um, that's to me, that's kind of the unfortunate part of the state of my profession at this point in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what my training and in particular my practice, I'm really working to try to change that. So to listen with the intention of understanding is to be able to guide people, generally speaking, to the places they need to go to work to resolve those issues. And to be able
Yeah.
to work with something that is so uh, potentially destructive as trauma and do it without having to step foot into the trauma itself, I have found opens up so many doors for healing for people. Anybody
Imagine.
whose therapist is sending them to me, uh, they know one thing. They've talked about their trauma extensively, and they're still struggling with the responses. Right?
I see.
Those responses are there for a very good reason, because you experienced a trauma, and whatever you did in those moments, however you responded, one thing is certain: you survived.
Mm.
Because you survived, those responses are going to be your go-to responses. It's almost illogical to plug in new responses, right? Except that everything about your life and your situation hopefully has changed.
It's different.
And it's
Yeah.
different. And if it's different, then maybe it's okay to have different responses.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that is kind of part of that journey.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can take a couple of sessions. I mentioned before, my sessions are 2 to 2.5 hours long. So sometimes
Yeah.
it can take a couple of sessions of just talking and listening to get to the place where someone's willing to entrust me with guiding them to that place. But
Yeah.
in many ways, without trust and rapport, we're not going to be able to get where you want to go.
Sure. Do you, can I actually expand this question? And I'm got to
Sure.
figure out how even want to ask this question. You've said that the work that gets done, it's not you technically who does it.
Mm,
That it's the
the client.
patient, the
Mm,
client, yeah, the client. But you said earlier, so I'm going to bring back something else, and you're going to go, damn it, I wish I didn't say that. You've also said that by working with many clients, you've actually experienced commonality in some of the ways that they viewed not even necessarily their trauma, but you even used the word archetype, that there
right.
were archetypes that sort of common human experiences. I would love don't obviously you're going to hold off on names, but I'd love to hear some of the like how archetypes have expressed themselves across several clients. I'm not even sure how to ask this. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah,
Like,
that does. That does. So, the archetypes of, well, one we talked about, like the bad one, right?
yes,
The bad one.
right.
Well, that's an archetype that we're in the process of experiencing right now. And you can
Yes.
say, and obviously we're talking about presidency.
A president-elect,
Yeah.
yes.
So how that persona for many, many people who've experienced traumatic father figures is triggering. And it's triggering in this subconscious way, right? And just the presence of that person, I think before I said, it's like when you're out having a good time with your friends and you suddenly remember, oh, I've got to go home and he's going to
Yeah.
go. It's like that. It's in the background, but it's there. And that is kind of this long, slow, corrosive upset, right? So to be able to use something like an anchor and step out of that, just to tie a couple of things together, is to remind yourself, yeah, he's over there. This is not my life now. I don't have to go home to that person, thank God, right? But so there's an archetype. You know, that archetype also comes up when we talk within ourselves, right? The part of us that is full of sometimes judgmental,
Yes.
negative, stereotypical language about the kind of person we are, right? That's this bad parent, that voice, right? The trickster, interestingly, is another relatively common one that comes up. There's this part of you that trips you up for one reason or another. Sometimes it trips you up because it's better to trip you up now, and then you don't have to really fail, right?
Yeah.
It's funny to watch you give up before you start, because then at least you won't fail, right? It's this, this kind of way of thinking about things that is completely illogical.
Yeah.
But the subconscious mind isn't logical. That's what our conscious mind is for.
Yeah. What if we flipped it? What if we flipped it around? Wasn't that very California of me there to use the hang? I didn't grow up in Los Angeles in the '80s. No. But what if we flipped it around? There we go. Keep it going. What if we flipped it? Like, what about I don't remember how Jung called it, but ultimately the archetype of the Empress in the tarot, the major arcana, like the Earth Mother, the caring, the nurturing mother. Have you seen it? Evidence of that? I'm not sure what the
That's
word
a
I want to use, but
great question. So this is getting right to the crux of so much of this is that those positive archetypes typically they don't just show up, right?
oh,
We are, but it doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that they're not something that we experience woven through the fabric of our day, right? We're much more likely to experience the negative. Does that make sense? But in hypnosis, you could be guided to the place where the Empress is. And once that connection is made, it can't be unmade. But it's really recognizing that she was always a part of you. She was always there.
yeah,
I recently had a client and a young person, and they're really, really into fairy tales. And they've done such tremendous work, changed their lives incredibly over. We've been working together more longer than for most of my clients. Most people I see typically between 3 to 6 times, and then we're going to take a break, go back to your life, and then we're going to check back and see how you're doing, see if we need more work. So we've been working together about a year, and this person has just completely transformed themselves. And
wow,
we're getting kind of to the end. And they said, I feel like a fairy tale would be a great way for us to kind of mark the conclusion of our time together. And so I wrote this fairy tale of the inner self, right? And there's this shadow figure, the hero, actually. There's the child in white who is beautiful, spotless, perfect. and everything positive, just like every child. Right? Worthy, deserving of love, of respect, of kindness, just like every child that ever was. There's the fairy princess, who is all the light that we have a tendency to hide because we're afraid. And all of these characters in this story kind of very organically the story actually came to me in a dream, and I just wrote it out. So it was so interesting, because when we talk about these archetypes, right, um, we naturally respond to them, and it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, the culture you come from. We recognize these parts of ourselves, and that's a really powerful thing about hypnosis. Is for all of us, this subconscious mind is like a crowded apartment building. There's all these parts of ourselves, and we talk about ourselves that way, which is really interesting. There's a part of me that really wants to wake up and go to the gym every morning. There's a part of me that really just wants to roll over and have a piece of pizza off the bedside table, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're completely different, right? But we get all of these different parts of ourselves through different lived experiences. And sometimes those lived experiences butt up against each other and they don't match. And so there's a whole branch within hypnosis called parts therapy, where we're trying to, in that sense, my role is like a mediator between the part of you that really wants to go to the gym and the part of you that wants to roll over and have a piece of pizza, right?
Sure.
I have to mediate that to come to some workable balance, right? But some of these parts are these sort of buried archetypes, right?
I see.
And
Yeah.
sometimes to guide someone, and as I think I said before, I see my role as a teacher and a guide and a coach. Sometimes I'm a cheerleader. I'm there to help you find what you need to find within yourself. And if I tried to impose my archetype that I think is the right one for you in this moment, then the likelihood is you're just going to reject that, because the likelihood is
I
it's
see.
not right.
Sure. Sure. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I I want to. Sorry, I got a little emotional there. I'm not sure if you saw that, but
I did.
you made me laugh. Which thank you. That was kind of you, because I'm thinking about children who deserve love and fairy princesses, and it's not. Oh, I'm getting emotional again. Why did I do
Well,
that?
to just
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
briefly on that, that I found so many times to be the most beautiful foundational piece of work that I do with clients, to see themselves in the archetype of the newborn,
Yeah.
right? Wow, there's a newborn baby there. Isn't it a beautiful baby? It deserves all the love, all the kindness, all the care, all the good things that life has to offer, just like every other baby. Wouldn't you agree? Oh, wait,
Of
I forgot
course.
to tell you, that's baby Amy, right? That's when it changes everything. Those are the kinds of insights. This is hypnosis is really insight in the best cases, I'd say, insight based work to guide someone to the place where they can see the universal truth of their worthiness,
Right.
their lovability, and to recognize it. There's nothing wrong with me. There was never anything wrong with me. That was something external that was put on me.
Right. That's something I think many of us in the LGBTQ community certainly feel. Um, Absolutely, transgender people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We lack a sense of worth, and it's something that we get from outside, not from inside.
Sure.
Although it becomes internalized, and at
Right.
some point it's like I don't even deserve to feel better. you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
So you answered my question. I didn't even ask it. So it was very well done. Thank you for that, by the way.
Sure.
That was beautiful. I'm gonna cry again when I'm editing this, which I guess is
Well,
maybe still therapeutic.
Amy, you might be in a hypnotic state when you edit this because those creative flow states are also hypnotic states. And so you'll be able to absorb that suggestion and
I hope so.
there it will be.
Yeah, I hope so. Because that did hit me kind of hard. Hit me really hard. So I want to ask one more question. I'm
Mhm.
looking at we're starting to run a little short on time. I do want to ask one more question, and I get the sense I know the answer to this already, but is there is there any is there any human experience we couldn't work through using hypnosis?
That is a very good question. So, in terms of human experience, uh, we always want to be very careful with a modality like hypnosis. So, people who are experiencing schizophrenia is contraindicated for that
Okay.
hypnosis. But in terms of trauma, in terms of self worth, self love, self confidence, all of those kinds of things, hypnosis is very, very good for. I would say where where the water gets murky is that not all hypnotists are trained the same way. Are in many places in the country there is no licensing for hypnotists. There is no kind of governing anything, and so that's why it's important, in my view, if you're thinking about going to see a hypnotist, to find someone who's certified through something like the National Guild of Hypnotists, um, because the National Guild is the oldest certifying body in the country, largest certifying body in the country, and that's in fact who my certification training program is through, and they have standards of what uh, represents the boundaries of hypnosis. Number one,
Oh,
and
I
number
see.
two, we have a very strong code of ethics for our hypnotists, and so. As I said, there's only a couple of places, a couple of states in the U.S. that have any kind of requirements at all for hypnosis.
Really?
Well, I think that's a reflection of the way that people tend to see hypnosis still as entertainment, right? And
Sure.
that's another whole thing that I could talk about for 45 minutes. How that's kind of undermined in a lot of ways what's possible with hypnosis. So
Yeah.
many clients I've seen, Amy, they their therapist or psychiatrist tells them to come see me for some hypnosis, and they think that does not compute at all. Like, how
It's
is
gonna be
barking
hooey.
like a dog or clucking like a chicken going to help me? Well, this
All
is
right.
therapeutic hypnosis. Unless there's some therapeutic reason for you to bark like a dog or cluck like a chicken, we're not going to do any of that, right? And I haven't found a reason for that just yet. But
I was
um,
gonna ask. Yeah.
anyway, it's really something I'm so passionate about,
Yeah.
and I appreciate this opportunity to come and talk to you about it today.
Oh, no, absolutely. I'd love to know. You said you had originally two resources that got you to a point where you could do your own self hypnosis.
Mhm.
And maybe actually I should ask this question a different way. Rather than asking you what those resources are, how does somebody learn self hypnosis like you did?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's a oh well, I'm a person who's used to talking for hours at a time. So if I go on too long, I guess you can edit
No.
it down. But so there's a couple of different things. First is to recognize when you naturally, in the rhythm of your everyday experience, are in a hypnotic state. We remain very suggestible for about 5 to 10 seconds after we come out of like being in a deep daydream state. When you come back and you're kind of wondering, if you're drooling or if anybody was watching you, right? You're still in a suggestible state. So if you take the time to prepare yourself, you
Yeah.
can give yourself a suggestion. It's got to be positive. It's got to be in the now. It's got to be believable, and it has to be delivered at the right time.
I see.
So there. That's recognizing when you naturally get into those hypnotic states and exploiting that to create some simple change. I would never ever suggest anybody work with deep trauma on their own.
Sure.
That's the kind of thing where it's better to have somebody to guide you. You get in, you get out, and it's too easy to get lost in the weeds
I
on
would
that by
agree.
yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't use self hypnosis that way, but uh, to use self hypnosis as to recognize those states means you can start to induce those states for yourself. I've been surprised how many people like me, maybe like you, when we were kids, you'd sit on the floor, you'd pick a spot on the wall, and you'd stare for a minute, and then it gets kind of fuzzy, kind of hazy, and you feel that feeling in your body. Well, you are inducing hypnosis. That's what you're doing.
Oh.
And so we do this, and we know how to do this. The thing is, in our culture, we tend to separate hypnosis, air quotes, from these natural experiences. So there's kind of the surfer method where you recognize when you're going into that state and you say something out loud to yourself in that moment that you want to achieve. Like it could be just confidence, you know. Um, the other way is the Coué method. Emile Coué was a French apothecary around the turn of the century and the last century, the 19th century to the 20th. And he came up with what's called the Coué method. And the Coué method is just before you go to bed, you say to yourself 20 times, just as you're falling asleep, every day, in every way, I get better and better. Every day, in every way, I get better and better. You say
I
the same
remember
thing.
that.
Yeah. You say the same thing
Yeah.
when you wake up. So that's the Coué method. He invented this method because he recognized that that's a pretty profound hypnotic state. Um, Now, this is a method that I use myself. And what's really interesting about it is, at first, it feels a little silly, to be honest, right? But soon enough, you fall into this pattern where you start to think, well, what does that really mean every day in every way? Does that mean I'll be a better hypnotist? Does that mean I'd be a better father, a better friend? And all of those things then become the suggestion,
Oh.
right?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And so it becomes a beautiful way to kind of end the day with it's like an affirmation, right?
Yeah.
And it's being open to the possibility that yes, I'm not at the end of my journey. I could always be a better hypnotist. I could always be a better friend, father, partner, what have you. And so
Right.
it's really, really beautiful. And you're saying it when you're in this relaxed state. And so, and of course, the other way is to go see somebody who does hypnosis and ask them to teach you. And now I'm bolder. I would ask that or tell that hypnotist, look, this is what I want you to do. I want you to teach me. I want you to make a recording for me. I want you to take me into hypnosis, and I'm going to record that. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to work at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So self-hypnosis as a wellness practice is something many of my clients stick with it. I really ask people to work. I make a recording for you on the first session, a custom recording.
Yeah.
And I ask people to work with that at least during the time that we're doing our work together. And, many people, though, they find that it's so empowering, so relaxing, and so pleasant to go into that hypnotic states that I've had people, quit drinking after work and they do their hypnosis instead because
Wow.
no calories, number one. Number two, though, it does give you that opportunity to start to determine what your responses will be in certain situations and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So on that note, how does everybody find you in particular on the internet
so I'm
so that we can get our own?
sure. Well, I do see clients online, and I do my training both online and in person. And one thing that I would just put out there is that this is a field that needs diversity. I feel like that's really, really important for this modality to reach all the people who it can reach and who it can help.
Yeah.
So there are other training programs out there. I have my training program where I teach my method that I talked about. I'm at summithypnosisnw.com. That's my website. I'm in Summit Hypnosis in Tacoma, Washington. I see people online. You can find me there. Summit Hypnosis on Facebook. And I'm not a terribly technological person. There's maybe more than one Summit Hypnosis on Facebook, but I'm a people person, which is better for what I do anyway. But
For sure.
the website, summithypnosisnw.com.
Okay. You have an Instagram account, I see too.
Oh,
Do
yes, I
you
do
use
have
the
an
Instagram?
Instagram account. Yeah. That would be Summit Hypnosis.
And NW,
And
yeah,
okay, I'm
on
glad one of
Instagram.
us
Okay.
knows what that is. Yeah. Well, that
Well,
shows
I'll
you how
link all
much I
of
use
these.
it. Okay, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
I'll put that one last then. I'll make sure the Facebook one is second. I didn't.
Yeah. Mostly, I'm in my office seeing clients, and I really don't get involved in the
Sure.
technological part of things very much at all. But I have a couple people who help me with that from time to time. From time to time, when I remember to ask. So,
Which is good enough.
yeah, yeah.
Well, gosh, I just got to say, Deane, I mean, I thought this was going to be fascinating. I didn't think I'd end up crying, but I just want to express so much gratitude to you. I think that what you do is very impactful, and I agree. If we had more diversity in spreading these techniques, I think we would end up probably a better world, a better universe. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. It's really this saved my life. It changed my life, and the thing I love about it so much, I'm so passionate about, is that we all already have everything we need to do this. Just a little
Right.
guidance, right? Learn how to use it, and you can start to affect change.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And I know that there's been the studies I'm thinking of were done with meditation, but I know that I imagine there are similar studies that as like a group of people, like in a city, when there's more people capable of using these techniques, I imagine overall the city gets lighter, gets more peaceful. Do you know the study I'm talking about? There was
I don't know that study, but it seems like I probably should.
Yeah, maybe I should see if I can dig this up. But it was there was gosh, I wish I could remember. It wasn't a very big city, but there was somebody came in and said, I'm going to start teaching meditation techniques. So ultimately relaxation techniques. And over the course of maybe 6 months, like violent crime went down. I mean, and like weird things, like people running red lights went down. Things that you're like, how'd that get in there? But the people in general got better. They became better people.
Well, better is the kind of a judgment that it's best for me not to make. But I have
Good point.
who were angry all the time and very sort of aggressive towards other people, unkind. Universally, those are people who weren't kind to themselves, right?
Yeah.
Hadn't been treated kindly in the first place and had never learned to value themselves or value kindness. And going through these kinds of processes where you recognize your own humanity, your own innate worth, lovability, recognize the fact that there's nothing wrong with you and there never was. Those kinds of profound structural changes will certainly affect how you move through your day, your life,
Yeah.
your week, your year, all of it.
Yeah. I
I'm a
completely
much, much
agree.
better person since I started doing this work.
I believe that. I do. All right. I feel like I could talk to you for another 3 hours. And I
Well,
also feel like you could talk to me for another three
I
hours for that.
certainly could. That's why those sessions are so long.
Right, right. I will. Let me go ahead and shut this down, though. I will admit I'm disappointed. I'd love to hear so many more stories.
Mm.
I will say though, let's see. So, I am Amethyst Herrick. You are listening to Gender Identity Weekly. I am speaking with Deane Benninghoven, and I want to thank all the listeners. And let's see, what did we talked about? We talked about becoming able to. Oh, what was the key phrase that ended up making me cry? That we're worthy just as
Worthy.
we are?
Worthy, yeah.
Okay.
Just, we're always worthy. Always are worthy and always will be worthy. Just like every other baby that's ever been born in the world.
Mm,
Right? That's such
that's a
a
beautiful
beautiful
thought.
sentiment.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Deane. Thank
Oh,
you again.
thank you, Amy. This has really been wonderful for me, and I appreciate so
Thank you.
much your invite and your allowing me to speak to you and your audience today.
Oh, yeah. No, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.